Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and in this workshop, we're going to build a new type of list widget. Now, Appsmith already has a list and a table widget for displaying an array of data, and between the two of those, they cover most use cases. The table widget has inline editing, and you can add a new row. You can create drop downs with a select widget in one of the columns. There's tons of different features. It's really powerful. And then the list widget, it's more flexible because you can put any widget inside of it, even other list widgets. So between those two, you're probably going to be able to get what you need without building a custom widget. The one thing that they can't do though is drag to reorder rows. So today we're going to use Sortable JS to build a new custom widget that lets you drag rows around to reorder them or swap their position. The Sortable JS library has tons of different options to make all this stuff easy. You can even set up multiple lists and drag an item from one list to the other, or maybe you want to clone it so that the original stays in the first list and you just make a copy and drag that into another list. A lot of other cool features with this library. So let's get started. First, we're going to check out the docs for Sortable JS, and then we'll get that working in a custom widget. And lastly, I want to take those values after you've resorted and save it back to a database so that you can just drag a row and have that actually change the value for the sort order or some numeric column in your database. All right, let's check it out. Okay, this is the library we're going to use, Sortable JS. So the most basic example here, you can reorder items and it just pushes everything else down the list. So if you drag one item to the top, it's changing the index of all of these by one. And then there's a shared list. So you can drag an item in between lists and it maintains the original styling that was going with that element. But if you wanted, you could like change the color to match wherever it's the list that it's going to. Then there's this cloning option. So you've got a static list here and you can copy items from it, and it's making a clone of the source here, but not removing it from the original list. And then there's a bunch of stuff on sorting and filtering. One thing you'll notice is that you cannot select the text because the mouse click starts this drag. So you can't really click into there or double click or copy the text anyway. So to get around that, they have this handle feature where only the handle part is draggable, and then you can still select the text if needed. Then there's some filter options. They got some settings that you can adjust to control the threshold of when it swaps. And then there's this cool grid one. So a lot of cool use cases you could do with this and lay out things and let the user reorder this way. And then this nested one is pretty cool. It's it lets you drag within a certain level here, or you can actually move items from level 3 here up to 2, or back to the first level. It's not changing the styling or the numbering, but you could add your own logic to do that stuff. This is just handling the placement of that item. So it's pretty cool. It does a lot of stuff for you, makes it pretty easy, and you just have to add your own styling and whatever logic to generate the list. So today we're going to use this library. I'm going to start with the basic example here of just reordering a list. And so when you drag an item, since it's changing the index of all these other ones, we want to save that value back to the database, and it's going to affect all the rows if you go to the top. If I go to the middle here, it doesn't change the first couple rows, but it throws off everything after, right? So I want to save that value and know the order of each one that the user has inputted. So I have a table here of some tasks, and there's an order column. It starts out taking the order just from the ID, and if you add a new task, that's like just going to keep incrementing, but then the user can change that order. So I want to set up a UI that lets us drag these tasks around and update this order column for the full set of the affected rows. So let's check out the docs for Sortable here first. Once you import the library, it shows several examples of ways to import it here if you want to use ESM version or the UDM. Then there's, if you want to cherry pick specific components instead of importing everything. So one way or another, you import it. And then you've got a container of child elements. It can be an unordered list. It could be a div, whatever it is, just some container that you're going to target. And you use that ID here to grab the element and then just run sortable.create on that element, and that's it. It'll render a sortable list that you can drag around. And then there's a bunch of different options that you can add. So you need the element, and then optionally this object here, and tons of parameters. It just changes the behavior, the UI, adding different classes to help you target those things. So that's the basics. What I want to do is put this example from this first one here into a custom widget, and first just get that to render anything that works, and then swap out this portion for our data. And once it's dynamically generating the list, then the user can drag those around, and we need to capture that event so that after they release, when they finish the drag, we can take all the new index values and update those rows in the database. So let's start out with importing. I'm going to take this from the default version here and grab the HTML. And so I'm starting out in a blank page of the app here. The only thing I have so far is this query for that same table I just showed you. So I'm selecting all the tasks by the order column, and I'm going to drag in a new custom widget and get that basic example working first, and then we'll pass in that data. So from the custom widget here, go to edit source. And I'm just going to clear all this out on the JavaScript, the CSS, and the HTML, and then put that script import tag here. Then we need a list of items. So we'll copy this section and put that in the HTML. And so now we have a list of items here, but they're not draggable yet. I am importing the library, but I'm not telling the library what to do with this container. So back here, we just need to target that element and then run sortable.create. So I'll do that on the JavaScript side now. Okay, it looks the same, but it's sortable now. So it's actually functioning, and the library is turning this container, this unordered list, into a list that I can drag around. But you'll notice I got this warning that I'm missing an Appsmith on ready function. So you can get a few things like this to work in a custom widget without an on ready, but you really should just use it every time, best practice, because there's a lot of things that won't work without the on ready. You won't be able to pass in data and trigger events from outside the custom widget and interact with it fully. So just put all of your code inside the Appsmith on ready, or on model change as the other method. So we're going to start out with just the on ready. And this takes a function as its parameter. So inside of here, I'm going to add an arrow function and add the code here. And you can see that warning is gone now, and the code still works. So you should have something here inside the onReady. But if you've got a lot of code to write here, to me, it's a little easier to just pull this out into its own function. So it's not nested like that, and it's a little easier to edit. So I'm going to create a function called load list. And inside this function, then we'll put this code and call the function up here. And so that should get us back to the same point. It's functioning again. And now I've got a separate function here to edit everything. Just going to clean this up and change these to const. All right. So next, I want to get this looking a little bit more like a list, like these items. So before we go on to any more functionality here, go into the style side and let's add some padding to the body. And then on the individual list items, we'll do a border. Okay. And I need to add some padding here as well. Let's do 4 pixels. And then I'll do larger on the front there. Okay. And lastly, let's do a border radius. Cool. And I think it'd look good with a little more spacing on the bottom. Okay. So that looks a lot more like the list now, and the dragging is working. So the next thing is to pass in some dynamic data and generate these items. So I'm going to go back to the HTML side here and get rid of this list. And then we want to pass in our own list of list items here and fill this element with items generated from the data. So back to the main app editor here. The default model lets you pass data into the custom widget, and you can also edit the model from inside the widget and pass data back out. So I'm going to pass in that list of tasks from my get task query here. So we'll take this data and inside the default model here, I'm using the mustache syntax so I can reference the other queries, and then just give it an object with a tasks property that is the get tasks data. So it's got an object with one property and then that array. And we'll go back to the custom widget editor. And so right here in this function that's building the list, we can just grab that data from the model, map over it, and add LIs to this parent element. So let's see, here we're defining the element. I'm going to define the data as well for the tasks. Cannot type. Equals appsmith.model tasks. And then we'll define the element and then map over the tasks. I think I will use for each here. So for each one of these tasks, we want to do something here. We're going to create a new list item first. Okay. And then I want to set the text of this list item to this tasks. Let's see, we're going to look at the field names here. Yeah, we'll just use the name and create a list of them first. I just want to get that one property. Okay, and then I will set its inner HTML to the t.name. Yeah. And then just add that, append that to the main element. So element.append child. Cool. Okay, so now we're generating a list of list elements and appending them to the parent, the unordered list. And this is coming from the actual database query. So when the app first loads, if I refresh this, it's going to run that database query, put that value in the Appsmith model. And then since we're using that Appsmith on ready, it waits for the rest of the app to be ready before it runs that function and populates the list. Let me double check here that it is still working. We're able to drag things around. Okay. So next is getting the data out of here, like to get the numbers of the things that were moved around. I'd want to put more than just the name in here, because you could end up having, you know, the task name change or two tasks with the same name or whatever. So this task in the model here, if we look at the model, each one of them has an ID as well. And I want to use that ID to, let's maybe set a data attribute so that it's not visible here, but it's like part of the element. And then I can pull that value out later. So before I append it, let's set attribute using t.id, and I'll use a data attribute. So if I inspect this and just look at one of these, okay, so they all have a data ID attribute with that particular item's ID, and it's not visible, but there's something in there I can extract. So now I want to catch the event when the user stops dragging. So there's events when they first mouse down, or when they start dragging, or when it gets over the top of another one. There's all these other events, but I can't save it to the database until I know where they're releasing it, where its final position is. So let's look at the docs here for this event. It's end, something on end. Here it is. So in the options, when you initialize the sortable element, one of the properties that you can pass is called onEnd, and that takes a function which will pass the event. And from there, inside the event, you've got like the old index, the new index, if you just want the for that one row, where did it start and where's it going. And then there's you can also get like the full list of the all the indexes just by looping over the events and getting like the child elements. So this only gives you the individual numbers, but since they're all going to change, you know, when you drag these items around, everything below it, its index is changing too. So I want to get the full list from the DOM, like from the actual document that's live, instead of what I started with, which has changed. So I think what I want to do is loop over the items to get their current index, and then save that to the Appsmith model. So this creates it. We need an event when they let go for onEnd, and that would go right here. So when we initialize this, there's this optional option object that you can pass in with the onEnd, and this takes a function. Okay, so first I would just want to grab that list of elements so that I can get them in an array and loop over them. So const items is going to be equal to an array from those elements, so I can have the array methods to iterate over it. And let's see, that would be element.children. So this will give me an array that I can iterate over. And then the result of that, I want to return the new order every position. So const new order is going to equal the items mapped. And here I want to iterate over each one and get the index. So I'll have the item itself and then the index. And I want to return, let's see, for each one of these, I'll return an object. So I'm going to put parentheses around curly braces to return an object directly. And the index is going to be 0 based, but the actual position for the list is 1 based. So I'm going to say that the order column, the one that we're using to actually sort them by, that we're trying to update, is going to be equal to the index plus 1. And then the ID is going to come from this item. I got to get the attribute from this. So I think this will work. I.get attribute. Okay, let's see what's off here. Oh, I'm inside an object that is a comma. And then let's just log this. Okay, so when I drag a row, it is logging the order, where the new number, and the ID of the object that was moved. So if I move the last one to the top, then the ID that was 5, its order is now 1. What? This is a string though, the ID. I want to make this a number. Okay. So now I have an array that I can iterate over and update a bunch of rows saying set the order equal to 1 where the ID is 3, and then go to the next one and set this and this, because every row is changing when I move it to the top. If it's in the middle or whatever, it doesn't quite affect every row, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to loop over the full set, and then depending on your use case, you might filter out the ones that weren't affected, or if you're doing the swap method where it only changes the kind of like the source and the destination position there, and they swap, it won't affect the middle rows at all. So there's different ways to use this library, and the rows that get affected are different, and I don't want to spend too much time programming exactly how to do that since there's so many approaches. But the point is, I want to take the user's input here and save that back to the database somehow. So in this case, I'm just going to get all of them, and we'll loop over each one of these and do an update to this row with this value. Okay, so we're making progress here. I've got a log of the data. I want to actually pass this to a function now and do something with it. So let's create the update query. Back here to the app, I already have the select query. So now I'm going to add a new one to the same data source. And this is the task table. So we'll make an update query. And the column I want to set is the order. So I can get rid of all the other columns. Okay, now I'm going to pass 2 variables to this function. One for the ID here, and then one for, or the order, and then one for the ID down here. So inside of here, we'll use this.params because I'm going to be passing parameters when this runs. And so this one will come from the order parameter. And this.params.id. All right, and then I need to call this function in a loop with that array of data. So let's go back to the UI here. The first thing is to get that data out of the custom widget. So when you create a custom widget, when you drag it in, it's got this events section here and an on reset click that's just part of that default example. I'm going to delete this event, add a new one, and we'll call it order changed. So there's been a change in the order. And then once you have an event, you can call it from the custom widget, and you got to tell it what you want it to do with this event. So first, I'm just going to show an alert just to see that it's working. And then we can use this to pass the parameter to that function and run through a loop. But first, it's just getting the event outside of the custom widget and getting something to fire. So I've got an event called order changed. And then back to the custom widget, right? Let's see, right here. When that order changes, I want to not just console log it, but appsmith.trigger event order changed. And now it should show so here it shows the event was fired because I'm inside the custom widget editor, but I don't see what the event is. And then out here, now I'm seeing the actual event. So next I want to pass some data to this event and use this event to call something where I can loop over all of it. Now, if I was just sending one ID, I could make the action, that query, to do the update and pass it the one ID and we'd be done. But I need to loop over a whole list of rows. So I need to write a loop. So I'm going to call a JS function here instead. I got to write a function for the loop, and then that can be the trigger. And we'll pass in the variable to it. So this will be update all rows. Let's call it update all. And it's going to take that new order array. So I want to map over that data for each, I think. We'll do new order for each. And for each element in here, maybe I can keep this on one line. We'll have a row, and I want to run update order on that row, passing in that that object. So I think just the row. Yeah. I'll run update order, passing in the data of this row as I'm looping over that data, and then just run the query to show all the new rows that have been updated. So get the tasks. Now, I don't want this to run too soon, so I need to await all of these here. But to do that, I don't want to wait for the first one and then start the second one, and then wait for that to finish and then start the third. So we can use promise.all so that it'll wait for the last one to finish, but it doesn't do them all sequentially. So if I just put promise.all around this, await, I think that should go through the entire array, run that function once to update each row, and then get the tasks. And we want to await this one as well. So now I can call this function and pass it the new order array. So instead of showing that alert, we run that function, which takes a parameter, and that's a variable name, so I have to put that in the curly braces here. I think we're just about there. I want to show the raw data so I can see that ID number. So we'll use another, or a table widget instead of our custom list here. And we'll look at that get tasks data. Okay, so here's the actual data that's in the database right now. Let's order it. Oh, I need to see the order column. So we'll put this where we can see it. We can hide the ID. And connected data source is 5, and this one is matching it. So if I drag 5 to the top, okay, new order is not defined. So it tried to run that function, and we got an error somewhere. Let's see. I don't think I referenced new order here, so it must be in the JS. It looks like it didn't pass the parameter to this function, and so it wasn't able to use it here, okay? So, oh, I know. Back in the custom widget editor here, I'm triggering the event, but I'm not passing the data. I'm logging it in the console log, but I didn't actually pass it. And I think this needs to be an object. So I'm going to call it a property of new order, which has the value of the array. Okay, because the event was already triggering. I just didn't get the data. Now let's see what we got. One more time, we're trying to move the bottom row, connect data source to the top here. Okay, that's a different error. Undefined is not iterable. So it's getting to the code now. Tried to run this. Await promise.all new order. Let's see. Let's look at the query here. I didn't change this from the sample, where ID equals. Okay. Let's see. Now, setting them all to the same value. There it is. Okay, I think it's working now. Let's refresh and start over. So take build custom widget to the top. And there it is. And it looks like it pushed everything down one. So we'll do deploy app to the top and just make sure this goes to number 2. Cool. Yeah. So it's updating every row. And if I go to just here halfway, the first 2 didn't actually get affected, but that update query, the logic that I'm using is actually going through the full set. So if you wanted, you could filter the new order array to see if the ID is changed. But it really just depends on if you're doing that swap or the clone method, or if you have multiple lists. Like, I think this shows enough just to get you started using this library. You're able to dynamically generate a list now, capture the event when the user makes a change, use that to run a database query, and extract the positions from that list. So that should be enough to build any one of those other options for the different types of sortable lists here now. You could make a Kanban board. It could be like a recipe builder if you're like pulling ingredients here and building a list or an invoice. So lots of cool use cases. All right, so I think that's everything I wanted to cover on this one. Appreciate everyone watching. Please feel free to drop a comment below if you got any questions on this workshop or ideas for future ones. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.